All right. Well, I know that you're going to be very, very excited this morning to know that we're going to have a vocabulary lesson. We are in the point in Jesus' life on earth where he is dealing with the paraplegic at the Pool of Bethesda, which is just outside the northern steps of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And we began that last week, and we will pick that up and continue with it today. But that got me to thinking about some words that have application as a part of the story that we're dealing with here in Bethesda. And so I just got carried away and put together a vocabulary list. Some of these words you will be very familiar with. Some of them you may not be familiar with. The bad news is they're all going to be on the final exam. The good news is we probably won't get to the final exam for at least 2 or 3 years. So but we'll try not to be too tedious with these, but hopefully you will find it informational and educational, if not entertaining. The first word I'm sure you're very familiar with is the word theology. Theology is simply the study of the nature of God and religious belief. And of course, this is a major college course, and it's the subject of voluminous literature. You could fill libraries with the literature of the theology of God. Another one that you're probably quite familiar with is Christology, the nature and work of Jesus, the incarnation, the resurrection, and his human and divine natures. Christology, I'm sure you're probably aware, was the source of major conflict, especially over the first 250 years of the church. This completely divided Christianity, both in the West and in the East. And it had to do with the nature of Jesus, his divinity or lack of it, his humanity or lack of it. And people fought wars over it and killed each other over it and divided the church over it. And it's never completely gone away, but it doesn't seem to be as acrimonious now in our culture, at least, as it was in the first 250 years. This you may or may not be familiar with. This is ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is a study of the nature and structure of the Christian church. And here again, of course, this continues to be one of the major sources of division and disagreement within the Christian community. And this is the division between the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant movement, between the Greek Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox. It's the breaks between all of the many different denominations that we have still in existence today. And it's the divisions within the various bodies of those denominations. Certainly, Church of Christ is very much guilty of that. We have divided and subdivided the subdivisions and continue to do so over and over again, and trying to figure out the nature and the structure of the Christian church. And that's ecclesiology. And the shame of it, beyond the division of it, is that at its very core, we're already wrong because Jesus never built a church. And so we're dividing over something that Jesus never intended. And for the first 250 years, the sacred community of Christ gathered in homes with servant leadership and worked together to figure out how do we practice citizenship in this new kingdom. How do we imitate Jesus? And then, as a famous book said, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Remember that old book, David? I'm talking about the Greek history. A guy named Constantine came along. And all of a sudden, that sacred community took on organization. It imitated the structure of the Roman government, the Roman Empire, step by step, from the Pope all the way down to the laity, as they called it. And ecclesiology became a real thing. And it continues to be a real thing, unfortunately, in the world today. Another word you're probably familiar with, because we talked about it in here quite a bit, is eschatology. And eschatology is a study of the things that concern death, judgment, and final destiny of soul and humankind. Eschatology has to do with end days, when all things will be made new, when Jesus will come again, when Gabriel will blow the horn. All of those metaphors are wrapped up in the idea of eschatology. Jesus didn't have much to say about this, except maybe in Matthew 24 and 25. And what he said there became very obscure, because there was clearly a commingling of the destruction of Jerusalem that would happen in AD 70 and the end of all things. And it's been the subject of debate and discussion for 2,000 years as to how you interpret that. We haven't figured it out yet. And quite frankly, we're not going to figure it out until we see it. And then it'll be all clear, and we'll all say, oh, wow, that's what it meant. Yeah, that makes sense. And it'll be good for those who are ready for it. That's eschatology. You may not be familiar with this one, or you may, soteriology. And soteriology is a study of religious doctrines of salvation. So when we talk about how are you saved, what does it mean to be saved, then we're talking about soteriology. And this is what got me thinking about this in relationship to the paraplegic and why you're having to endure all of this morning. So this is what we will come back to in a little bit, and we'll unpack with quite a bit more detail, because, quite frankly, the event at the Pool of Bethesda has a great deal to do with soteriology. And it's very important to us in that regard. So we will come back to that one. Put that one in your memory pack. Some others that you may or may not have heard of. Pneumatology, you see the word pneuma, air, spirit, breath. Who do you think of? Holy Spirit. Pneumatology is a study of the Holy Spirit. Bibliology, of course, is a study of the Bible. And you realize, of course, that for 400 years there was not a Bible. So the Christians who are going to be in heaven from the time, Pentecost through sometime in the 5th century got there by word of mouth, by hand-copied scrolls and codexes of the writings of the apostles and some of the early church fathers. Hamartiology was frankly a new one to me. I hadn't really encountered that. Hamartiology is the study of sin. Hamarti is the Hebrew word that's translated sin. It actually comes, as you've heard preachers say, from the literal meaning of missing the mark. And so a study of what sin is and is not is a study of hamartiology. Petrology is a study of the patriarchs, the early church fathers, and there are some interesting studies involved with that. Angelology, of course, you understand that would be the study of angels. Demonology. Mariology is the study of the mother of Jesus, Mary. And epistemology is an interesting concept, and it's the study of truth. How can we determine that a thing is true or not true, always true, never true? What is truth? As who was it? Pilate said, what is truth? So that is epistemology. Okay, got all those? If you can remember all of those for 2 or 3 years, you'll do really well on the final. To our text, and we started this last week, but we're going to pick up the text at least again, just so that we can all get together in remembering what's going on here. And this is from the 5th chapter of John. When these events were completed, Jesus led his followers to Jerusalem, where they would celebrate a Jewish feast together. In Jerusalem, they came upon a pool by the sheep gate, surrounded by 5 covered porches. In Hebrew, this place is called Bethesda. Crowds of people lined the area, lying around the porches. All of these people were disabled in some way. Some were blind, lame, paralyzed, or plagued by diseases. And they were waiting for the waters to move. From time to time, an angel would come to stir the water in the pool. Whoever reached the pool first and got in after it was agitated would be healed of his or her disease. In the crowd, Jesus noticed one particular man who had been living with his disability for 38 years. He knew this man had been waiting here for a long time. Jesus, speaking to the disabled man, said, "Are you here in this place hoping to be healed?" The disabled man said, "Kind sir, I wait, like all of these people, for the waters to stir, but I cannot walk. If I am to be healed in the waters, someone must carry me into the pool. Without a helping hand, someone else beats me to the water's edge each time it is stirred." We just mentioned in passing last week that, to me at least, this is an unusual and strange situation to encounter in Christian scripture. That these people are laying around this pool waiting for a, quote, angel to come and stir the water. And then by the stirring of the water, one person, whoever goes in first, would be healed. I frankly don't understand. I don't know. Do you have any ideas on it, David?
I don't have any specific ideas on the symbolism or the meaning behind it, but like you and I discussed a little bit last week after class, when Jesus was confronted about healing on the Sabbath, he made the point that he said, "My Father is working, and so am I." And I think that the fact that that occurred on the Sabbath, he's pointing to that and saying, look, I see that God has made provision for one person to be healed, and I did the same thing. And I'm doing the work of my Father just exactly as I saw it being done. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that it actually was a real thing. Why God was choosing to work that way. And again, remember, it's actually an angel being sent, because angels are messengers from God. So exactly why, I don't know. I'm kind of with you. It's not really clear to me why it would be that way.
Well, obviously, John makes no excuse or justification. It's simply a statement of fact as far as he's concerned. It just, Mike, did you have anything you want to add? Anybody else? Tom? Well, whatever it is what it is. So that's the situation that we are encountering. This, I showed you a few pictures last week of the Pool of Bethesda. This is what it looks like today. It's really an interesting place. It's a fun place to visit when you're in Jerusalem. Jesus said to the paraplegic, "Stand up, carry your mat, and walk." At the moment Jesus uttered these words, a healing energy coursed through the man and returned life to his limbs, and he stood and walked for the first time in 38 years. But this was a Sabbath day, and any work, including carrying a mat, was prohibited on this day. Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "Must you be reminded that it is the Sabbath? You are not allowed to carry your mat today." And as we mentioned in closing last week, this just is the most incredulous thing that I can imagine. But not surprising given the attitude of the religious leaders of that day. They were far more concerned with keeping the iota of their interpretation of the law of Moses than they were concerned with any individual, and especially an untouchable. This included the bottom caste. And it speaks multiple volumes about them and why Jesus was so unhappy with them, so dissatisfied with them. The formerly disabled man said, "The man who healed me gave me specific instructions to carry my mat and go." It's like Jesus was, of course, the very fact that he was healing on the Sabbath is already too much. We've already encountered that. And now Jesus gives him a specific order to pick up his mat, knowing that that's a violation of what the religious leaders are going to claim is the law of Moses. The Jewish leader said, "Who is the man who gave you these instructions? How can we identify him?" And the man genuinely did not know who it was that healed him. In the midst of the crowd and the excitement of his renewed health, Jesus had simply slipped away. Sometime later, Jesus found him in the temple and again spoke to him. And Jesus says, "Take a look at your body. It has been made whole and strong. So avoid a life of sin, or else a calamity greater than any disability may befall you." I really like the way that the voice puts that. It gives it an entirely different context than what the King James does. And it resonates with me, at least, the way that it's described there. The man went immediately to tell the Jewish leaders that Jesus was a mysterious healer. So they began pursuing and attacking Jesus because he performed these miracles on the Sabbath. Okay, with that background, let's go ahead and watch the little episode from The Chosen, and we'll see it enacted out, and then we'll come back to this discussion of soteriology. Well, if you were able to understand it, there was a key comment there right toward the end when they accused Jesus of violating the law of Moses, of violating the Torah, first 5 books of the Old Testament. And one of the disciples said, not Torah, oral tradition. When we talk about soteriology, we're talking about the understanding, the belief, the bedrock idea that God took on flesh and lived under the law of Moses perfectly, without sin, so that he would be the perfect lamb, the perfect sacrifice for the sins of the world. It's pretty fundamental, don't you think, that that fact be demonstrated. And he is being accused here of violating the law of Moses, the Torah, by healing on the Sabbath and by ordering a man to pick up his mat and work on the Sabbath. If the religious leaders are true, then he is no longer innocent under the law of Moses. And that's a major charge. And that's an important accusation. So, from a soteriological standpoint, it's important to us that we fully understand that Jesus, in fact, did not violate Torah. He did not break the law of Moses. On this occasion, or when he ate the grain on the Sabbath, or on any other occasion, when he healed or did other things on the Sabbath. And we're going to spend a little bit of time unpacking that idea because it's pretty fundamental. Who can tell me what that picture is? Is it a sand time measurement? No, that's a good guess, though. It would make a good one, wouldn't it? Yeah. All right. Well, that's something for you to look forward to.
I have a question. Just a general question that you can talk about. Why were they standing around waiting for somebody to do something?
Why were they standing? You're talking about
They're standing around on Sabbath.
Yeah. The Jewish leaders, yeah. That was their main job, was to find guilt. That was the first priority of their office, was to find and assign guilt. They existed for that. And, of course, particularly with somebody like Jesus, who was so totally counterculture and who was uprooting everything that they had stood for and taught and believed all of their life.
You mentioned that critical part there where they accused him of sin. And growing up, I was basically under the impression that, like the Pharisees, we had to find the sin in other people to make sure that if we had to save them, and so we had to define their sin for them, and that's what they were doing. They were defining the sin. And the older I've gotten, I keep asking the question, is that sin? What is sin? And falling short of the mark and all those kind of things. But ultimately, now I'm seeing it's really not my job to decide what is sin for somebody, and we go to the part where we've also been taught basically at different level that if it's sin to you, if it's wrong in your eyes, then you shouldn't do it. But it's something that we're kind of shackled with in our tradition because we're to define sin, and instead of I'm trying to have my mind changed in the last few years to look at what's good instead of worrying about what's sin, because it seems hard to define that for every last person.
And we're going to unpack that more right now, and that's kind of key to the point. We have certainly not in any way grown out of that tendency and that feeling of responsibility to assign sin based on our interpretations. So the Decalogue, the Ten Commandment law, the Torah, the law of Moses, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. On it you shall not do any work, you or your children or your servants or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. That is the law. That is the law. Now the question becomes, of course, what is work, right? So what you do when you have a law, and you're living under a law system, and we do this in all of our governments, because that's the only way you can exist under law, is you build fences. Somebody came up with the acrostic, LAW, line avoiding wrong. Where is the line? Where is the fence around the order, the command, the rule, the law? At which point you become a lawbreaker. Fence or wall that limits acceptable action. Just a real simple example, our speed limit. When I drive down one of these streets here, Blackhawk, when I'm driving down Blackhawk going home, two lanes divided boulevard, 2 lanes going both ways, no traffic. It's Sunday morning, everybody's in sleep, and the speed limit is 30 miles an hour. What a ridiculous law. But the minute I hit 31 on my speedometer, what happens? I broke the law. I'm a criminal. And that's what law does. It sets the fence beyond which, when you trespass it, you have become guilty. It requires a definition of terms, interpretation of intent, whether it's murder. What is murder? How many different ways do we define murder in our law system today? First degree, second degree, manslaughter, on and on and on, and every one has a fence around it. They did the same thing with the law of work. They built fences around what it means to do work on the Sabbath. It was not part of the law of Moses. It was part of the oral tradition. The Decalogue, just for your information, has 613 commands in it. The Decalogue has 10 commands, and then they wrote 613 commands to enforce the 10 commandments of the Decalogue. The number of negative commands is 365, the number of days in a solar year. The number of positive commands, 288, the number of bones and major organs in the human body. And if you are a physician or a person who knows the physiology and that's not true, don't blame me, I just read it. The fringe or the strands and knots on a talit. A talit is the prayer shawl that the Jewish people wear. They are very carefully installed on there to add up to the number 613. That is a direct reference to the number of commands based around the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments of the law of Moses. This is the nature of law. This is why Jesus would say, you bind heavy yokes on people, but you yourself don't make any attempt to keep them, because it's impossible. You can't be done. Rabbis say these were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, memorized and passed down by each generation, considered equally as binding as the Torah, the law of Moses. The oral traditions of the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, not so much Sadducees because they didn't do that, but the Pharisees, the scribes and the rabbis, those oral traditions are held to be as equally binding as the Decalogue. Rabbi declared it illegal to write them down until AD 70. They had to write it down in AD 70. Why? Because there wasn't going to be anybody around to remember them. They were getting scattered, and so they began to put it down into writing. Before that, they remained oral. They were handed down from generation to generation. They were memorized and enforced by the Pharisees. By and large, they were rejected by the Sadducees and the Essenes. They held only to the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. Most of the priests, the Levites, associated with the Sadducees. Most of the scribes associated with the Pharisees. There are two components of all of this, of the Talmud. There are actually two Talmuds. There's a Jerusalem Talmud and a Babylonian Talmud. Two components of it, the Mishnah and the Gemara. And I'm going to try to get through this really quickly because we're running out of time. The whole Talmud consists of 63 tractates. Think of a tractate as, you remember when we used to have tracts in our building? We would have a tract on baptism and a tract on repentance and a tract on this, on instrumental music and a tract on this. Well, a tractate is an accumulation of information about a specific subject. So in the Talmud, there are 63 different tractates. They're voluminous. In standard print, it's over 6,200 pages long. It is written in Aramaic, which reads from right to left, top to bottom. It contains the opinions of thousands of rabbis on a variety of subjects, including law, ethics, philosophy, customs, history, theology, lore, and many other topics. And I made it a point a few years back to open that volume up and read about what it said on work on the Sabbath. And I didn't even scratch the surface. If you're having trouble going to sleep at night, it's a good way to do it. Just open that up and start reading it. But it's, this rabbi said this. This rabbi said this. They didn't agree. This rabbi reconciled it, and on and on and on and on, ad nauseum. This is what the Jerusalem Talmud looks like. Example of it. First written redaction of oral traditions wasn't completed until 220 A.D. Its orders, its contents by subject matter rather than by any kind of biblical context. That's the tractate idea. There are 6 orders of information within it. They're called, I'm going to just briefly run through these: seeds, festivals, things pertaining to, seeds pertain to prayer and blessings, tithes and agricultural laws, festivals, laws of Sabbath and the festivals, 12 tractates, women, marriage and divorce, oaths and the laws of the Nazarites, 7 tractates. Boy, you women think you've got it difficult now. You should have lived under the law of Moses and under the oral traditions of that time. It is unreal, the specificity with which they controlled your life, your very, very personal life. The most personal things about you were specifically written into the oral traditions. Damages, civil, criminal law, courts and oaths, holy things, sacrificial tithes, temple, dietary law, purities, laws of purity, impurity, dead, laws of food purity and bodily purity. And all of those have their own tractates. Mishnah lists prohibitions in 39 creative activities. What you can and can't do when you're planting, plowing, reaping, gathering, threshing, winnowing, sorting, grinding, sifting, kneading, cooking, shearing, combining, dyeing, and 25 more. And in case you have not figured this out yet, this is a Shabbat lamp. And this comes back to working on the Sabbath. You cannot build a fire on the Sabbath. You cannot light a candle on the Sabbath. If you want light after 6 o'clock on Saturday evening, you better light that candle before 6 o'clock. Now, this is a candle holder. It's a Shabbat light. And if you want it to be dark, you can turn it so that the window is hidden, and that's not work. But you can't light the candle. We're out of time. And Rick talked about this a few weeks ago. When I was in Israel, they have the Shabbat elevator. And I got on one, and I was going to the 4th floor, and I pushed the 4th floor, and nothing happened. And I thought it was broken, but before I could get off, the door closed, and it went up 1 floor and opened. I pushed the 4th floor, and nothing happened, but it closed the door and went to the 2nd floor and opened. On a Shabbat elevator on Saturday, the buttons don't work. They go 1 floor at a time all the way up and 1 floor at a time all the way down, because pushing a button on the Sabbath is work. That's today. It's been that way for thousands of years. Jesus did not violate the law of Moses. He violated the oral tradition of the Pharisees, which he held in contempt. Our soteriology is safe. And we're out of time. Thank you for your presence and your patience. Have a wonderful, God bless week.